Well, Ernie Pyle was a war correspondent during World War II, and he came from my home state of Indiana. So I thought I'd just read you a little bit of something that he wrote. This is an excerpt from his book, Ernie's War, the best of Ernie Pyle's World War II dispatches. The kind of bridge that wins wars. Somewhere in Sicily, September 6th, 1943. It was an hour after daylight when I returned to the German-blown highway crater, which our 3rd Division engineers had been working on all night. It really didn't look as though they'd accomplished much, but an engineer's eye would have seen that the groundwork was all laid. They had drilled and blasted 2 holes far down the jagged slope. These were to set upright timbers into, so they wouldn't slide downhill when weight was applied. The far side of the crater had been blasted out and leveled off, so it formed a road across about 1/3 of the hole. Small ledges had been jackhammered at each end of the crater and timber bolted into them, forming abutments of the bridge that was to come. Steel hooks had been embedded deep into the rock to hold wire cables. At the tunnel mouth lay great timbers 2 feet square, and other long pieces of timber bolted together in the middle to make them long enough to span the hole. At about 10 a.m., the huge uprights were slid down the bank, caught by a group of men clinging to the steep slope below, and their ends worked into the blasted holes. Then they were brought upright by men on the banks, pulling on ropes tied to them. Similar heavy timbers were slowly and cautiously worked out from the bank until their tops rested on the uprights. A half-naked soldier, doing practically a wire-walking act, edged out over the timber and bored a long hole down through 2 timbers with an air-driven bit. Then he hammered a steel rod into it, tying them together. Others added more bracing, nailing them together with huge spikes driven in by sledgehammers. Then they slung steel cable from one end of the crater to the other, wrapping it around the upright stanchions, and drew it tight with a winch mounted on a truck. Now came the coolie scene, as 20 shirtless, sweating soldiers to each of the long spliced timbers carried and slid them out across the chasm, resting them on the 2 wooden spans just erected. They sagged in the middle, but still the cable beneath took most of the strain. They laid 10 of those across, and the bridge began to take shape. Big stringers were bolted down. Heavy flooring was carried on and nailed to the stringers. Men built up the approaches with stones. The bridge was almost ready. Around 11 a.m., jeeps had begun to line up at the far end of the tunnel. They carried reconnaissance platoons, machine gunners, and boxes of ammunition. They'd been given number 1 priority to cross the bridge. First, Major General Truscott arrived again and sat on a log talking with the engineers' officers, waiting patiently. Around dusk of the day before, the engineers had told him they'd have jeeps across the crater by noon of the next day. It didn't seem possible at the time, but they knew whereof they spoke. But even they will have to admit it was pure coincidence that the first jeep rolled cautiously across the miracle bridge at high noon to the very second. In that first jeep was General Truscott with his driver, facing a 200-foot tumble into the sea if the bridge gave way. The engineers had insisted they send a test jeep across first. It wasn't done dramatically, but it was sort of a dramatic thing. It showed that the old man had complete faith in his engineers. I heard soldiers speak of it appreciatively for an hour. Jeeps snaked across the rickety bridge behind the general while the engineers kept stations beneath the bridge to watch and measure the sag under each load. The bridge squeaked and bent as the jeeps crept over, but it held, and nothing else matters. When the vital spearhead of the division got across, traffic was halted again, and the engineers were given 3 hours to strengthen the bridge for the heavier traffic by inserting a 3rd heavy upright in the middle. That, too, was a terrific job, but at exactly 4 p.m., the first 3/4-ton truck rolled across, and they kept putting over heavier and heavier loads until before dark, A giant bulldozer was sent across, and after that, everything could follow. The tired men began to pack their tools into trucks. Engineer officers who hadn't been to sleep in 36 hours went back to their olive orchard to clean up. They had built a jerry bridge, a comical bridge, a proud bridge, but above all, the kind of bridge that wins wars. And they had built it in one night and half a day. The general was mighty pleased. Operation Husky ended on August 17, 1943, with the Allied capture of Messina on Sicily's northeastern coast, just 2 miles across the Strait of Messina from the Italian mainland. The Germans and Italians sustained heavy losses, mostly in prisoners, but 39,000 German soldiers were evacuated across the strait to the mainland under the cover of darkness. Ernie Pyle died in 1945, covering the invasion of Iwo Jima in the Pacific. Thanks so much for listening. I love you guys. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.